What if I told you Keir Starmer just got torn apart in Parliament by the real leader of the opposition? His so-called economic plan is already falling apart, and millions are feeling the pain. He promised stability, but all we see is chaos, rising taxes, collapsing trust, and a Prime Minister who dodges every real question. In this video, we break down the brutal takedown that left Starmer exposed. Watch closely, this could be the beginning of his downfall.
Leader of the opposition, can we bear it up?
Mr. Speaker, the triple lock was a Conservative policy. Rather than... Yes.
Hold on. I know... You was inadvertently said. Carry on, Lee.
Rather than the Prime Minister congratulating himself for what we did, why don't we talk about what he's doing? From Sunday, Labour's jobs tax will mean many British businesses face a terrible choice: to cut wages, put up prices, or sack their staff. What is the Prime Minister's advice to those businesses?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she says the triple lock was Conservative policy. It was once thought to be the party of sound finances, but they blew all of that. Mr. Speaker, she asked what we're doing. We're clearing up the mess that they left. We're dealing with global instability, and we recognise the pressures that are bearing down on businesses and individuals and working people. That's why we're rolling up our sleeves. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to announce the national living wage increasing by £1,400. That's a pay rise for millions of workers. We've announced £150 for the Warm Homes discount, extended now to 6 million households. That's 1 in 5 families. And wages are going up faster than prices. And never forget, the party opposite, worst living standards on record, inflation up to 11%, public services left on their knees.
Mr. Speaker, the only mess is the one that he made with his budget. They had an emergency budget last week that fixed nothing. He says he's bringing stability. All we see is fragility. During the election, the Prime Minister also promised that he would not increase taxes on working people. But even the OBR says that the jobs tax will be passed on to workers. On average, families will be £3,500 poorer. Why should anyone trust him again?
Prime Minister.
Well, her fantasy figure is about as much use as Liz Truss's economic planning. And she turns up every week to carp from the sidelines about the decisions we made at the budget. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, she held a press conference, and she couldn't say whether she would reverse the decisions that we made at the budget. Now, I understand, because she can't bring herself to say that she doesn't want the investment of an extra £26 billion in our NHS. I'm not surprised at that. That's 2 million extra appointments, that's 1,000 more GPs, a pay rise for nurses, etc., etc. But let me get her position right if I can follow it. She wants the extra £26 billion in the NHS, Mr. Speaker, that was paid for by the national insurance rise. She wants that. She doesn't want to reverse the national insurance rises. So she's now reduced this absurd position of voting in the budget, carping against a budget that she actually agrees with.
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with making people poorer. I don't agree with pensioner poverty. I don't agree. Out there, they are calling it awful April. That's because of decisions he has made, because he made promises and broke them. His promises are worthless, Mr. Speaker. People are getting poorer. Before the election, he pledged to freeze council tax. Instead, it's going up everywhere. Even in Birmingham, where there's 17,000 tonnes of rubbish uncollected on the streets. Does the Prime Minister regret promising the British people he would freeze their council tax when he has so obviously failed?
Prime Minister.
Well, I have to ask, if she doesn't want people poorer, why didn't she resign when she was in government? Mr. Speaker, the last government put up council tax for 12 years in a row. She, I think, was actually Minister for Council Tax. And in the year she hasn't been. What she do? She put it up. And even now, the Conservatives' own Local Government Association manifesto, so currently their position, page 9, we asked the government to remove the caps on council tax. So who's leading the charge? Hampshire County Council, they wanted a 15% hike, we said no. Slough Council wanted a hike, we said no. Windsor and Maidenhead was Tory, now Lib Dem. They wanted to hike and we said no. And it's no surprise that council tax is £300 cheaper under Labour councils than under Tory councils.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't want to talk about Birmingham, and that's because he knows the situation. So I'll say it again. 17,000 tonnes of rubbish on Birmingham streets. Normally, a state of emergency is called for natural disasters, not Labour ones. His policies have left our economy dangerously fragile. The Chancellor, once again, left herself no room for manoeuvre. Economic experts, real economists, say she will either have to break her fiscal rules or put up taxes. Which will it be?
Prime Minister.
I think she must have picked up the script she was using a few weeks ago. Because it was only then she was saying, in the spring statement, you're going to put up taxes. But look, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the situation in Birmingham, it is completely unacceptable. I fully support the Council in declaring it a major incident to resolve the situation, and we'll put in whatever additional support is needed. But when the party opposite was in government, we lost more days to strike action than in any year since the 1980s. NHS workers were on the picket line, not on the front line, and that sent waiting lists through the roof, so we'll take no lectures on industrial harmony from them.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House would have heard that he didn't say whether or not he could keep his fiscal rules. That means that it's either that or putting up taxes. 9 months ago, we left Labour the fastest growing economy in the G7. We did. And I remember watching his MPs laughing at their first destructive budget. They've had another one that has made our economy dangerously vulnerable. The Bank of England says his policies have pushed up the cost of living for families. Does he disagree with the bank, or does he accept his policies mean higher bills?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she must be the only person left in the country who actually thinks they did well on the economy when they were in power. That was what was tested at the last election. Living standards the worst on record. Inflation, 11% it soared up to. The NHS on its knees. Oh, Mr. Speaker, she's so obsessed with talking down the country that she's not read the OBR forecast properly. Growth up in 2026, 2077 up, 2028 up, 2029 up. And thanks to our planning reforms, the largest growth measure the OBR have ever costed. And what did the Tories do when the bill came before Parliament? They abstained. Well, you don't grow the economy or build houses by yourself. They're the same old party. They haven't changed. Nothing's new.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about inflation. We left it at 2%. It is now twice what the OBR forecast when we were in government. The fact is, his decisions have made our economy fragile, just as we face global trade wars. In November, I urged him to seize the draft US trade deal Conservatives negotiated. Instead, Mr. Speaker, he lost our most experienced trade negotiator. It's no wonder he can't get a tariff deal for British cars. On this side of the House, we secured investments for that industry. £600 million from BMW, £2 billion from Nissan, £4 billion from Jaguar Land Rover. Labour's record is a car industry in crisis, even before tariffs. There are 25,000 more jobs now at risk. He says he's preparing for eventualities. Can the Prime Minister tell us exactly what he is doing to protect the British car industry from his failure to negotiate?
Prime Minister.
We're taking a calm, pragmatic approach and keeping our feet on the ground. There are constructive talks that are ongoing on a wider economic prosperity deal with the US. That is really important at this moment. We are working with all sectors that are likely to be impacted, and we're guided by our national interest at all times. And that's why we've said we won't rule anything out. But it is important at a moment like this that we don't have knee-jerk reactions, that we are actually cool-headed about this, and that's why we won't rule anything out. But she must be. She's the Trade Secretary. She was the Trade Secretary, Mr. Speaker, who failed to get a trade deal with the US.
Let's be honest, what we just witnessed was nothing short of a political bloodbath. Keir Starmer, the man who promised to restore trust in British politics, was utterly dismantled in real time. And now that you've seen the footage, you can't unsee it. The mask slipped. The spin didn't land. And for the first time, the cracks in his carefully curated image were exposed for all to see. Let's break it down. Starmer came into power riding a wave of public frustration with the Tories. People were desperate for change. They wanted competence, clarity, and conviction. What they got instead? A Prime Minister who stumbles through policy, evades hard questions, and delivers vague reassurances while the country braces for yet another economic punch in the gut. Did you notice how he tried to paint his economic policy as bold and progressive? But when pressed, he had no answers, just deflections. He boasts about raising wages, yet conveniently ignores the brutal impact of his tax hikes on working families. It's classic smoke and mirrors. And the public is starting to wake up. Ask yourself this: if Starmer's plan is so effective, why are businesses already sounding the alarm? Why are families tightening their belts while his government pats itself on the back? Because the truth is simple: this isn't a plan for growth. It's a roadmap to manage decline, dressed up in empty slogans and recycled talking points. And let's talk about the hypocrisy. He slammed the previous government for instability, yet here we are, watching his own ministers backtrack within weeks of a major budget. His pledges crumble faster than confidence in the pound. He said he wouldn't raise taxes on working people, but the Office for Budget Responsibility itself confirms the burden falls squarely on the very people he claims to defend. Do you feel defended? Or do you feel betrayed? What we saw in Parliament today wasn't just political theatre. It was a warning shot. A clear sign that Starmer's leadership is not just shaky, it's built on sand. Every time he's asked to take responsibility, he retreats behind platitudes. Every time he's challenged with facts, he falls back on blame games. This is not leadership. It's survival mode. And here's the kicker: his opposition, once considered disorganized and discredited, finally smelled blood. For the first time, we saw the real leader of the opposition rise and hold Starmer to account with surgical precision. Every line hit home. Every statistic tore through the illusion. It wasn't just political, it was personal. And devastating. If you're still watching and wondering, is this really as bad as it looks? The answer is yes, and worse. Because if this is how Starmer performs when challenged, imagine how he handles pressure behind closed doors. Imagine how decisions are made when cameras aren't rolling. The man who once promised a fairer Britain now stands accused, rightfully, of deepening inequality, fueling economic insecurity, and hiding behind a crumbling PR machine. His government's response: a hollow cheer, a deflection, and then a press release about moving forward. But how can a nation move forward when its leadership is stuck in reverse? Here's what they don't want you to realize: this isn't a one-off. This is a pattern. And today, the pattern broke through the surface for everyone to see. Starmer can't outrun scrutiny forever. The press conferences can't shield him. And no number of carefully scripted statements will silence the rising wave of public discontent. Now the real question is, will the public act on what they've seen? Because this isn't just about Starmer. It's about every broken promise. Every family that feels squeezed. Every young person who sees their future slipping away. Every pensioner watching prices rise and services vanish. It's about a Prime Minister who promised transformation and delivered confusion. So what comes next? That depends on us. This moment could be brushed aside, just another political spat in the endless news cycle. Or it could be the spark that wakes people up. The beginning of the end for a leader who overpromised, underdelivered, and underestimated the intelligence of the British public. If you believe this matters, if you believe the truth should cut through the noise, then don't let this moment fade. Share the video. Talk about it. Demand better. Because if we stay silent now, we're complicit in the very decay Starmer once vowed to fix. We gave him a chance. He blew it. Now it's time to hold him accountable. This isn't the beginning of a new era. It's the beginning of the reckoning.